Hello and welcome back to Exothermic Plays Games. I'm Exothermic and the date today is Wednesday, October 30th, 2024. I've been doing a countdown of my favorite video games of all time through each day of the year, and coming in at number 63 is The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Majora's Mask is one of the few times we've gotten back-to-back Zelda games in the same time period. I am by no means an expert on the precise timeline of these games, and I think that's fine because even Nintendo is not an expert on the precise timeline of these games. But I think this is the first of only 2 times that back-to-back releases were consecutive timeline order. The game is a sequel of sorts to Ocarina of Time in the timeline where Link is victorious and following the events as a child. Majora's Mask is set in a new kingdom with new enemies, and it's got the absolute greatest storytelling gimmick ever in a game. Link is traveling through some creepy woods, and he's attacked by a Skull Kid with a very creepy mask. Hint, it's the name of the game. The Skull Kid defeats and curses Link to become a Deku child, powerless to stop him. Unfortunately for the Skull Kid, he abandons one of the fairies that was traveling with him, who joins up with Link to reunite with their brother. As you travel through the creepy woods, you find an underground path into Clock Town. It's a town with a big clock. But you also meet a creepy mask salesman who tells you they can return you back to normal. Oh, and you have 72 hours to stop some absolute catastrophe. The catastrophe is the moon. So you run around the town and meet a bunch of people, including a great fairy, and you get treated really terribly by everybody for being a Deku Kid. With 6 hours left in the 72 hours period, the festival in town arrives, and the door to the clock tower opens, where you can enter and confront the Skull Kid. There's several puzzles along the way here, and you're gonna get really familiar with them, because you'll do them a lot. In confronting the Skull Kid, he drops the Ocarina of Time, which he had stolen from you, and you play the Song of Time and rewind the whole last 3 days, at least until the point where you meet the creepy mask salesman. That's where you start off again, and he cures you of your Deku curse, turning that into one of his masks, which he then gives you. Majora's Mask is an ancient relic that belonged to this salesman and corrupts anyone who wears it to do terrible, horrible things and end the world, like crash the moon into the planet. In order to defeat the Skull Kid, you have to free 4 ancient spirits throughout the region who can unite to stop the impending apocalypse. You might think 72 hours is a very short time to complete 4 dungeons in entirely separate parts of the world, and you'd be right. Every time you play the Song of Time, you restart the 72-hour period. This includes losing many items you've gained, but not all of your money, and also, you do have to redo some of these puzzles, and you can use those items in different ways. For example, there's a little moon piece that drops into the ground at a point, and you can pick that up, take it to a Deku, and trade it with them to buy their house, and then you can use that to access things. But you can only do that once in each time loop, so that's a thing you can do in several different locations in different ways, even though it's the same thing. This gimmick is amazing. I ranked a game called The Sexy Brutale earlier this year as my 256th favorite game, and that game does this same kind of time loop, but across only just one hotel, and over a few hours, rather than 3 whole days. Across the whole town, the expansive wilderness and dungeons you do go through, there's events constantly happening to a fixed schedule, and you can track those in a little notebook, along with other important info that you pick up through puzzles, which you can use to expedite different tasks throughout multiple iterations of this time loop. Across the 72-hour period, which I think actually passes at a rate of 1 hour per minute of real time. Don't quote me on that. You can use this information to solve time-sensitive puzzles, like characters only being in specific locations for the puzzles in different times of day, or even just specific days. There's loads to explore with this, and it takes what is otherwise a pretty short window and gives you just an insane amount of things to do via this exploration. Right away, the game pushes the player to become familiar with looking at areas and their puzzles through multiple lenses at the same time, thanks in large part to the Deku mask the salesman gives you after lifting your curse. You can equip and unequip it to swap back and forth between human and Deku forms, allowing you to do wildly different things, but also causing characters to interact with you differently. The first dungeon you have to solve involves saving the Deku princess and removing a curse plaguing the water surrounding the Deku kingdom. The Deku won't allow you into the palace as a human child, of course, but you're allowed in as a Deku, though you still can't just go everywhere. You have to evade guards, stop the defenses, and sneak around to gain the information and tools you need to save the day, including new music for the ocarina. Even though this game is called Majora's Mask, and the previous one is called Ocarina of Time, I think you actually do more interesting musical stuff in this game. Even just the Song of Time becomes really interesting because you can play it backwards to slow the pace of time drastically, which is great and absolutely necessary, or double up notes to advance time to the next 12-hour marker, which not necessary, but saves you a lot of waiting around, and that's great. It's an incredible system that's always fun to execute. Combat is different depending on the form you're in too. As human Link, you do your normal stuff with your sword and you unlock your familiar items like your bow and your bombs as time goes on, but as the Deku Kid, you don't get any of that, and instead do a spinning melee attack and can shoot, I'm gonna say, not snot bubbles at enemies. There's an insane amount of masks in the game too. Some are used for puzzles, some are used for combat, and some are just used to be social and shop in different areas for reasons. I'm not showcasing many here, and a lot of them are optional, but they are a lot of fun to amass and collect and do these tiny little things with them. Once you're actually in the dungeon, it's pretty typical Zelda stuff. Get the map, get the compass, get the small key, get the boss key, beat the boss. Find a new tool along the way, and solve loads and loads of puzzles while fighting relatively basic enemies with mini-bosses guarding some of the more important items. The system isn't broken, and they didn't fix it. I know 2000 was a while ago now, but even in the newest Zelda games, this is still just how it works, and I don't see any reason why that simple structure should ever change. What makes Majora's Mask's puzzles so good, though, is the sheer combination of options available for how to approach them. Each one only has one solution, but you might explore a ton of things before you come upon the correct one, especially as you get later into the game, with a frequently growing collection of masks, songs on the ocarina, and tools for your human form. Things can definitely get pretty intricate to work your way through them. Unlike most Zelda games, you just really hit the ground running in this one. I think they assume most people that play this will have played Ocarina of Time, and that's a fair assumption, because once you get past the first iteration of the time loop and can start adventuring out into the wider world, you can just go. You'll have to do things in a particular order to get to the actual dungeons, but there's loads to do. Like, you can collect a dozen or so heart pieces before you even get to that first dungeon, if you want to just do a bunch of random things that are out there as side quests for you immediately. The onboarding for new tools at your disposal is also relatively quick, and there's very little hand-holding. Majora's Mask is one of the most intricate, complete adventure games ever made, and it's visually, I think, the most stunning game on the Nintendo 64. Yes, it's still, don't get me wrong, it's still the Nintendo 64, but the aesthetics are so memorable, and that gigantic moon will haunt my dreams forever. While technically the story is very short, with only a handful of dungeons, the unique time loop mechanic allows you to explore far more than any game before it, and even most of the Zelda games after it. It's rare for me to want to actually grab a physical notebook and take tons of notes about a game to experience everything it has to offer, but Majora's Mask is just that worth it. Also, I just love when a game gives you a true fail state, and if you just don't save the day and the 72 hours expire, you do get to watch the world end, which is kinda cool. Join me tomorrow as I talk about my 62nd favorite game where I save the world while on vacation.